Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sarah Pentecost with APA Virginia staff. Thank you for joining us for the monthly webinar series, Your Hour with APA Virginia, sponsored by the Berkeley Group. Just a couple reminders as we wait for everyone to join and before we get started here. The annual conference Resilience is happening in Hampton at the Hampton Roads Convention Center, July 21st through the 24th. And some updates since our last webinar. The full program is available, so you can now start to pick your sessions and see what's going on. We have a lot of great mobile tours lined up, opportunities to get out on the water and to see some old housing in Hampton. We also have a paint out pollution mobile tour, where it's a mix of conference people and volunteers from the community, but with the James River Association, we'll be able to paint the drains. So that's a really cool opportunity, and there are lots of neat things like that in these mobile tours, so I encourage you to take a look at those. You can add them onto your registration if you haven't already. The early bird rates for conference registration ends on June 30th, and then July 1, they'll all go up by 10%. So if you want that lower rate, make sure you get registered by the end of the month. And for those of you who need those per diem rooms, we have another room block open. So it's all available. All the info you need is on this website, apavirginia.com. For those who just joined us, thank you for joining us for the monthly webinar series sponsored by the Berkeley Group. These happen the fourth Monday of each month and cover lots of topics in the planning field. And they're all eligible for 1 CM credit. Now that APA Learn is a thing, we're able to offer CM credit retroactively for most of our webinars, and those are on our YouTube channel. If you just search for APA Virginia, you can find them, and the CM info is going to be in the comments section. So if you saw part 1 of this webinar, it is available for 1 CM credit retroactively if you did not see it. So if you love this part 2, you can go back and watch part 1, or you can watch it as a refresher and still earn a CM credit. Please contact Andrew Hopewell, our professional development officer, with any questions about that. Next month on July 15th, so we're moving it up a week for the annual conference, we will have City of Richmond planning staff to discuss Richmond 300, which is the master plan that is being made and carried out right now in Richmond. And this will sort of precede our annual conference in 2020, which will be in the city of Richmond. So we're very excited to have them with us next month. Today, we have with us Andrew Painter of Walsh, Colucci. Andrew works in the firm's land use and zoning practice group, where he focuses on securing zoning entitlements across Northern Virginia. Andrew advises clients on all aspects of land entitlement process and real estate matters, and frequently appears before planning commissions, local governing bodies, and citizen organizations. Prior to joining the firm in 2007, Andrew worked for members of the Fairfax County Board of Supervisors, County Administrator of Caroline County, and former Governor, now Senator Mark Warner. Andrew has spent much time traveling and writing about the region's land development history, and served as an adjunct professor at the University of Richmond and University of Mary Washington. He's the author of a 2018 book chronicling the history of the wine industry, Virginia Wine, 4 Centuries of Change, published by George Mason University Press. So I thank you for being with us today, Andrew. I am now going to turn it over to you, and as a reminder to everyone, we'll take all questions at the end, but you can go ahead and type them in as we're going along so you don't forget them, and we will wrap up with questions. And Andrew, whenever you're ready.
All right. Thanks a lot. I appreciate it, Sarah. Good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be back here for, I guess, part 2 of this little lecture that I style Rise of a Region. For those that participated last year or earlier this year, I can't remember when we did it last, that is available, I guess, on YouTube. You can just type it in, and makes for good bedtime listening for sure. I was kind of rushing through a whole bunch of things last time to try to get it in within 50 minutes or so. And what I thought I would do is sort of just go back through with kind of where we ended up last time, or how things sort of started. We talked about the importance of tobacco in the young colony. We talked about it was used as sort of a form of credit in early Virginia, especially in Northern Virginia. If you look at the Prince William County seal, for example, even to this day, it still has tobacco being shown as part of the county seal. But tobacco was used as a form of credit everywhere, and it was pretty remarkable. We talked about some of the young towns that grew up in the mid-18th century, be it Dumfries or the town of Aqua. And by and large, these were all laid out on grid street patterns at right angles, sort of perpendicular, running in a perpendicular axis to the river. And shown here, of course, is Aqua and sort of cattle going across the Civil War in the lower image. And of course, the biggest town in all of this, certainly the economic development engine of Northern Virginia back in the 1700s through the 1800s, was the town and later the city of Alexandria, shown here as well. And we sort of talked about the layout of the city of Alexandria and the economic backbone of that. But again, all of these are sort of river port towns that grew up, around tobacco warehouses and tobacco inspection stations. And we also talked about in the 1790s how Congress appointed President Washington to select a site on the border of Maryland and Virginia for this new national capital. And shown here with Martha and his family, he's picking out, the site for, the new capital city, which would be named in his honor. And I think a lot of people have posited that had it not been for the selection of this site on, the border of these two states, Northern Virginia and the metropolitan region of Maryland really might have ended up just being sort of a backwater area with maybe highways crossing it and just a place you go through rather than an actual destination that it grew up around. We talked about sort of the layout of Washington, D.C., the fact that you have two counties, one Washington County in Maryland and Alexandria County in Northern Virginia, which would be retroceded in 1846 back to the Commonwealth of Virginia and become Alexandria County. We talked about the importance of grist mills, being set up along water courses and being able to provide sort of economic development engines. A lot of these grist mills, again, they exist throughout Northern Virginia. You can sort of see them. Some have been restored and are in public ownership. Others, like Beverly Mill, shown in the upper left-hand corner, were the victims of arson. Or the one Piney Branch Grist Mill in the Clifton area of Fairfax County, shown in the bottom right-hand, are in private hands and have not been restored. But still, if you get an opportunity, you should go check out some of these. They're pretty neat. We talked about the canal era and sort of the early plank road era and turnpikes and sort of early railroads too. But the canals seeking to open up the interior of the continent to Northern Virginia and the Washington, D.C. area. Of course, we talked about the Potomac Canal and the Aqueduct Bridge going between Roslyn and Arlington, and Georgetown, the Alexandria Canal and the C&O Canal. We talked about the Civil War and how this entire region, from Alexandria out to Winchester, down to Fauquier County, was crisscrossed by both troops. John Mosby and his, the Gray Ghost and his Confederate raiders were notorious in this area. There were two major battles, the Battle of Ox Hill, shown here, the Battle of Manassas that we talked about as well, which would play a pretty prominent role in the development of Northern Virginia and where growth is occurring. After the Civil War, in post-war growth, we talked about the importance of the railroad and sort of these small towns growing up around the railroad, be it Clifton or Herndon or Vienna, Falls Church, all these sort of little railroad towns, all the way out to Purcellville and Manassas as well. And then, of course, the story of growth as you enter the 1900s really was, the growth of Northern Virginia really was Alexandria County and sort of these new neighborhoods that popped up, from Ballston to Roslyn and Roslyn Farm to Meyer Heights and Clarendon and Delray on the outskirts of Alexandria. This is sort of because of Arlington's proximity to the nation's capital and the fact that it's sort of absorbing all the growth emanating out from the south and west, it was natural that it should grow first. And of course, here's we talked about this too, sort of a newspaper ad in the Washington Post for growth in Clarendon and subdivisions in Clarendon, not unlike something that you might see from builders today, advertising in newspapers or online. Growth in the dairy industry remained very, very important. We talked about that as well in the late 1800s all the way up through the 1950s. Up until the 1950s, Fairfax County was the #1 dairy producing county in the Commonwealth. Shown in the upper right hand, you can see milk jugs waiting at Herndon, at the Herndon station along the what became known as the Washington Old Dominion Railroad. So just very, very important. Also, we talked about the problem with roads. When anyone would, when it would rain, when somebody would spit on the ground, the clay soil up in the Piedmont area of Northern Virginia would just turn into a muddy quagmire. Northern Virginia was known for the poor condition of its roads, something that would be rectified under the Byrd Road Act when Richmond would assume control for the state secondary system of highways, except in the towns and the cities and in the counties of Arlington and Henrico. But still in the late 1800s, early 1900s, the road network is pretty bad. All of this, of course, changes, as we talked about with the election of Franklin Delano Roosevelt in 1933. You get the mass infusion of federal workers coming to house and staff all of the new agencies through the Works Progress Administration and trying to get us out of the Great Depression. And then, of course, there's substantial federal investment here, including National Airport, which opens up in the early 1930s. You get Camp Humphreys, later Fort Belvoir, which becomes home to the Army Corps of Engineers. And as, again, we gear up towards World War II, things kind of go into overdrive with the number of federal workers and the importance of this region to the overall war effort. Most importantly, in 1944, you get the Pentagon. At the time, the largest office building in the world, opening up right across the river from Washington, D.C. There's an entire Pentagon road network that comes with it as well. But these federal investments really signify the massive growth, the start of the massive growth, which would carry through in the post-war era. New roadways accommodate this growth, such as Route 50, Arlington Boulevard, such as Shirley Highway, which is shown in I-395 here, that goes from Woodbridge all the way up to the 14th Street Bridge at Washington, D.C. This is a limited access highway. We hadn't seen anything like this before. And the only other roads that were, comparable would be Lee Highway, Route 29, would be Columbia Pike, or Jefferson Davis Highway, Route 1, which are shown in orange here. Some of the new growth that occurs after World War II we talked about, Fairlington, Park Fairfax, Shirlington, that whole area grows, just thousands upon thousands of homes to house these federal workers. And really, here's the population growth that we saw. For the first 4 decades of the 1900s, you're really looking at the growth of Arlington, shown in blue. Fairfax starts taking off in the 1930s. Again, it's much larger than Arlington County. And so Arlington really is absorbing the vast majority of the growth. Following the war, we're turning all of our efforts to peacetime efforts, and everyone's coming home. Those that can move, that aren't otherwise restricted by racial deed restrictions or can't get a mortgage or aren't moving into redlined areas, they're moving out to the suburbs. And you start seeing the phenomenal growth of eastern Fairfax County as Arlington builds out and Alexandria kind of builds out to the areas around McLean and Annandale and parts of what today is the city of Fairfax and Falls Church. All of these areas just kind of boom overnight. The Springfield area certainly is probably Northern Virginia's best response to the problems facing the need to house a lot of these workers. It eventually develops an area, sort of a central downtown area, and industrial areas on the outside. Eventually sprout Springfield Mall, and then a ton of tract homes around the new circumferential highway, which is known as the Beltway. You get new shopping centers that transform Northern Virginia from sort of being an appendage to the downtown to really being a satellite city of the downtown. The Parkington Shopping Center or Seven Corners. These are regional shopping centers. That means that Northern Virginians no longer have to go downtown for their shopping needs, to go to Hecht's Department Store or Woodward and Lothrop or Garfinkel's, if you remember some of those old names. If you go into the 1960s, again, the massive federal investment continues. Dulles International Airport on about 17,000 acres on the Loudoun-Fairfax County line. signifies the growth of the jet age. You get new subdivisions, crossing Fairfax County. One of the most famous, of course, being Reston, developed and named after Robert E. Simon, who lends his initials to the name of this new town. It's one of the few places in Northern Virginia that seeks to mix product type in terms of apartments and for sale units, multifamily with townhomes and single family, sort of mixing it all together with industrial and commercial uses as well. And at a time where a lot of Northern Virginians were being told that they could not live in certain areas, again, due to their ethnic background, this is an area that did not have any deed restrictions as far as covenants or anything like that. So really a remarkable testament to new town planning principles, which would later be emulated throughout the country. Growth in the 1960s also occurs around Tyson's Corner. We saw this with the coming of the Beltway. Roslyn and Crystal City also developed. So there's all sorts of new subdivisions and new shopping centers in the 1960s. There's new highways like the Beltway and Interstate 66. You also get the coming of Metro Rail. A lot of debates about whether or not housing should continue or we should be doing what we call today smart growth and sustainable growth and really restrict the amount of land. You had a lot of agricultural interests in western Northern Virginia, particularly in western Fairfax County, that ran the Board of Supervisors and knew that development was coming and they wanted to basically cash out. So you had this huge debate between the western landowners, the farmers in the western part of Fairfax County, and the home builders on one hand, and then on the other hand, the new suburbanites that had just moved to Northern Virginia and were very concerned about overcrowding of schools, lack of parks, and just endless amounts of traffic. And so those two forces battled it out, throughout the 1950s and 1960s. And there is a very good book called No Little Plans that highlights the attempts that Fairfax County made, the various boards of supervisors, and kind of this pendulum swing of growth and anti-growth that Fairfax County made in trying to implement various downzonings. And the Supreme Court of Virginia would just slap down those efforts, multiple times. But Fairfax did attempt to really rein in the type of growth that was occurring. And we'll see in the 1980s where they were actually ultimately successful. As I mentioned, Metro Rail came. We talked about that in the late 1970s, along the Orange Line and eventually the Blue Line in Arlington out to Vienna, and then the Blue Line from Roslyn down to eventually Franconia, Springfield. And we saw what Arlington County did about the need for the fact that the county was built out. It had deteriorating commercial centers, and they decided to adopt really national award-winning smart growth techniques with its bullseye concept around creating little mini cities with sort of a peaks and valleys between each one of them, centered around each of the 5 Metro Rail stations. Growth wasn't just limited in the 1960s and 1970s to Fairfax and Arlington and Alexandria. We saw down in Prince William County, the growth of Dale City and Montclair and Lake Ridge, areas around Woodbridge. We saw the revitalization of Alexandria and its waterfront all the way up to eventually the King Street Metro Rail station as well. And then as the 1980s dawns, we see sort of the go-go 80s. Growth continues west. Areas in Fairfax County around Tyson's Corner grow. Shown here is the Tycon Tower 1, probably the most emblematic building of the 1980s. If you had to pinpoint one building that symbolized the prowess of Northern Virginia becoming a destination for retail and commercial growth, it's probably that one building, even though it was supposed to have 2 sister buildings that were never built. And then the big issue of growth as it marched westward along I-66 was what to do with Fairfax Center and the development of that area. So shown here is Fair Oaks Mall. You can see Route 50 on the right-hand side, and then you can see Route I-66, Interstate 66 on the left-hand side heading out towards Manassas National Battlefield Park. And then as the 1980s dawns, again, continued growth. Reston Town Center pops up. We had never seen a sort of a suburban downtown like this develop. Just the quality and attention to detail hadn't really been seen anywhere in Northern Virginia, the DC metropolitan region. It had plenty of parking. It was all in private hands, so there was no graffiti. There were no homeless. Crime was low. It was everything that people wanted to see in the downtown, and it was supposed to rise like a Manhattan, surrounded by sort of a very treed, vegetated rural landscape. Which, if you were out there in the late 80s, early 90s, that's pretty much what it was. It was pretty neat and remarkable to see. And then, of course, major Fortune 500 companies come to Northern Virginia, starting with ExxonMobil in the early 1990s 80s when they move a division from their New York headquarters down to Northern Virginia, and then in 1987 relocate their entire corporate headquarters to the intersection of the Beltway and Route 50. But that puts Northern Virginia on the map as a high-quality place for commercial development. And then, of course, development continues westwards. The last dairy farm develops around Franklin Farm and Sully Station in the Oak Hill area, the Chantilly and Centerville area. And then where we left last time was to talk about the Route 28 corridor. This was an area that was identified for development in the 1980s. Here you had developers foreseeing the potential for new industrial parks and how this whole area right around Dulles Airport could house retail, office, warehouse, and manufacturing business needs. Developers at the time and landowners surrounding the Route 28 corridor, which at the time was just 2 lanes, they envisioned this idea that this could be, we could tax ourselves. VDOT wasn't widening the road, so we're going to implement a tax district, and they created in 1987 the Route 28 tax district to widen the road and eventually turn the at-grade intersections into a variety of interchanges up and down the corridor. And eventually, it continues to be widened over time, ultimately to 8 lanes. But for any of us that have lived through the widening of that, to see the way that traffic moves now versus the way it used to be, it's pretty darn remarkable. How things have happened. And of course, this is the last slide that I think we left with a couple of months ago. But just to see this 2-lane road, which housed farms right alongside of it on one side and the Dulles Airport on the other, and to see it to turn into really an interstate level type road is pretty remarkable. And the growth that has occurred, what you're looking at here is you're looking at Route 28 north towards the airport, and you see the big buildings at Dulles Corner heading in towards Reston, and it's like a whole nother city just sitting there, another sort of edge city there. One of those sort of edge cities, of course, is Dulles Corner. It was developed in the 1980s. You had a variety of suburban, very large, tall office buildings right next to Dulles International Airport, surrounded by different art and things like that. You have Westfields further down, which is an 1,100-acre corporate campus just off of Route 28. And what's interesting about this is that there was a massive Civil War reenactment in 1986 commemorating the Battle of Bull Run. I think the second Battle of Bull Run. And it was held like on the Saturday before the bulldozers were to start developing this project. But it was one of the largest reenactments in reenactment history, apparently. But that occurred in 1986, just again before the bulldozers started. When the Westfield International Conference Center opened, which is the hotel that's in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, a lot of us remember going there for the first time. Much like Reston Town Center, we had never seen anything like this. It was just a first-class, 5-star type, hotel, and it's really set the tone for a lot of the growth in the 1980s and what Northern Virginia was becoming. Eventually, in the middle, the lower part in the middle, there's the National Reconnaissance Office that ends up locating there. So a lot of defense contractors, some agencies, and then what sets Westfields apart really has been the location of the sort of the corporate location, but also the landscaping with dry stack stone walls and flowers and things like that, but a lot of vegetation. So, and that's shown in the bottom right-hand corner. As I mentioned, Fairfax had tried, had fits and starts about trying to rein in a lot of the growth from the 1950s all the way up through the 1970s. In 1982, the Fairfax County Board of Supervisors ended up downzoning more than 41,000 acres in what's known as the Aqua Watershed, and that's what's shown here in the green. The Aqua Watershed covers 4 different counties, and Fairfax decided that they were going to downzone 41,000 acres and then place an additional runoff protections on 64,000 acres outside of that downzoned area. In the late 1970s, Fairfax County's board had initiated a comprehensive plan amendment, and they directed county staff to complete a study of the Occoquan River Basin. And that report recommended that the best way to reduce stormwater runoff, so we're not tying it to just preservation of farmland, we're tying the downzoning to actual science here. The best way to reduce stormwater runoff was to downzone land in about 2/3 of the watershed, and that's exactly what they did. And so in this area, sanitary sewer is not to be provided in this downzoned area. Public water supply is not to be provided. It is provided in certain areas that were grandfathered in, but it's not expensive. You had a consortium of 39 developers that ended up suing, Fairfax County because of its Aqua downzoning. And this decision of the board to downzone was upheld in the 1985 Circuit Court decision, in which the judge ruled that Fairfax could severely restrict development in this portion of the county in order to protect the drinking water supply, because all this sort of drains into the Aqua Watershed and then ultimately to the Aqua Reservoir, which at the time provided drinking water for 600,000 Northern Virginians. So that's the way that Fairfax was able to win at the Circuit Court level. And if you take a look at what eventually happened, almost immediately overnight, the Occoquan basin, the Occoquan downzoned area, was chopped up into sort of 5-acre lots. If you take a look at the era of recordation of these subdivisions, it was almost overnight that it was chopped up there. If you drive through Clifton today, which is a town of about 170 people, the population really has not changed all that much in about 150 years. It is a picture-perfect little town, and it was also preserved without stoplights or anything like that, really preserved as a throwback to an early Northern Virginia railroad town because of this downzoned area. So you drive through Clifton, as you approach it, you see a lot of small farms and things like that, but a lot of it is large lot subdivisions that kind of look like this. Very beautiful, no question about it. But there's only a few farms, like legitimate farms, that are in excess of, say, 20 acres or so. The vast majority of it has been chopped up into 5-acre lots as well. And this is kind of what it looks like from the air. But again, beautiful as you drive through it. And in the heart of all of this sort of picture-perfect area is the little town of Clifton. Growth continues in Prince William County. You get Potomac Mills opening in 1985. By 1993, Potomac Mills Mall, right off of Interstate 95, was said to be Virginia's #1 tourist destination, with about 9 million plus visitors each year. Phase 2 would be completed late in 1986, and when that second phase was completed, the complex stretched for more than 9/10 of a mile from end to end. So a huge outlet mall. Also in Prince William County was the Williams Center controversy, which occurs in 1988. This is dealing with about 514 acres adjacent to Manassas National Battlefield Park. And if any of you all have read Joe Garreau's Edge City, he's a Washington Post writer. He dedicates a chapter to this controversy. The bottom line is that Hazel Peterson, which was a big development concern in the 1980s, they won a rezoning for a corporate office park and 975 homes in the 1980s from the Prince William County Board of County Supervisors. And they later changed plans to include about 1.2 million square feet of a regional mall. There were opponents, which came together in what was known as the Save the Battlefield Coalition, which ultimately won the battle to preserve this land from development in the fall of 1988, when they persuaded the U.S. Congress to employ a rarely used procedure called a legislative taking to acquire this land. When they acquired it, it did come out at a pretty hefty price of about $134 million. Even though it was eventually preserved, the developer did net $134 million. And you can sort of see the difference between, before, the taking, the legislative taking, and after Congress decided to basically use its power of eminent domain to forcibly sell the land. Shown here is Annie Snyder on the left. She headed up the Save the Battlefield Coalition and was, you can sort of see how they used, the concept of battlefield preservation in order to persuade Congress to use its legislative taking process. Loudoun County starts seeing a lot of development as well. The projects, once development had gotten to Loudoun County, were generally bigger than those in Fairfax. Much of the growth was in the eastern part of the counties as families sought lower home prices marching westward from Fairfax. And there was an acknowledgement early on in Loudoun County that growth was going to come. And the question really was how to manage that growth. And even though most of the physical construction would take place in Loudoun County by the 1980s, the plans for a lot of the communities that we now have heard of, that we are now familiar with these names, really began much earlier. One thing to note is that by the time that growth was at Loudoun County's doors, the proffer system that we use in Virginia was really already maturing, and it was increasingly common for jurisdictions such as Loudoun or Prince William to request cash and off-site contributions from developers. And Loudoun, more than any other jurisdiction, really, they were successful in exacting concessions from developers, especially for school sites and for roads. And the county planned, pretty much an entire curvilinear, grid road network that transformed eastern Loudoun. And that grid sort of road network has been built out in chunks over time as development has come. But you start also seeing bumper stickers that say, "Don't Fairfax Loudoun." You have a strong no-growth interest in sort of western Loudoun that was bent on trying to keep growth at the door and not, cannibalize eastern Loudoun too much. But a couple of these new subdivisions, shown here is the Sugarland Run subdivision, which was developed in the 1970s, 1980s. It's planned as a large community with a sort of a closed loop road. And in contrast to a lot of the colonial style neighborhoods, Sugarland Run homes, if you ever drive back there, it's pretty neat. They're actually built in sort of a California contemporary style with vaulted ceilings and modern exteriors. At a time when everything was going faux colonial, this was certainly a different type of place. You get Ashburn Village, 1987. It's 1,500 acres, about 5,000 units with four recreation centers and shopping centers. Just massive, huge projects compared to the much smaller ones in Fairfax. This is sort of what a lot of eastern Loudoun looks like. This is one of the roads, Ashburn Village Boulevard, with sort of curvilinear roads, grassy medians. This sort of permeates sort of the eastern Loudoun landscape. And again, here's kind of what a lot of eastern Loudoun looks like. Things also start happening for Loudoun County in 1989 when Xerox Corporation, if you guys remember Xerox, announced that they were going to create an $8 billion campus on 2,200 acres north of Route 7 outside of Leesburg. And on that, they were going to develop sort of an executive conference center and a training center. They wanted to do a golf course and a resort hotel, which has later been created. It's called Lansdowne, if any of you guys have gone there. And then they also wanted to develop 1,800 homes and a 518 corporate center. And this is what that corporate center what the Xerox Training Center looked like. And this is where Xerox sent all of its employees to receive training, sort of in this ziggurat kind of a place, which is still there today. It's now been rechristened the National Conference Center. But you can sort of see that, just like ExxonMobil located in Fairfax County put Northern Virginia on the map in 1987. 2 years later, Xerox is putting Loudoun County on the map as a place that you can do, as a corporate business address. And just sort of taking a step back about how quickly a lot of this growth occurred. This is the small village of Old Ashburn in 1985 looking north. And you can see it's looking north towards the Potomac River. You see the W&OD railroad, which is eventually the trail, sort of crossing, midway up the picture, and then up in the upper right-hand area, there's sort of like looks like a little cloud of white. That's the Xerox Training Center. So you can see all of this has since been developed. But even as late as 1985, there were really only about 1,100 people living in the greater Ashburn area from Route 7 all the way down to Route 50. It was very underpopulated compared to where it is today. While everyone was headed west, the inner suburbs also looked towards redevelopment in the 1980s. Falls Church, the city of Falls Church, started a major streetscape project in 1989. One of the first things that they did was to have a grade-separated crossing of the Washington Old Dominion Bridge, or Washington Old Dominion Trail. It's kind of an iconic thing when you drive through downtown Falls Church today along Route 7. But this is what West Broad Street, Route 7, kind of looked like heading eastbound. If any of you all are familiar with the Don Beyer Automotive Group, the Don Beyer dealership is shown in the right-hand corner near Dale Lumber, where that is right there. But you're looking eastbound towards downtown Falls Church. And of course, what they did was they did a massive streetscape project in coordination with VDOT that really led the effort. You started seeing some revitalization occur in the sort of the heart of it, the George Mason Square project, which is shown in the upper right-hand corner, right at the intersection of Lee Highway and Route 7. You start seeing the redevelopment of other things, such as the State Theater in 1997 being revitalized. And then, of course, there's the ribbon cutting for the W&OD Trail Bridge in the lower right-hand corner as well. Fashion Center of Pentagon City. This was a project by Melvin Simon and Associates. It opened in 1989. It had 170 retailers and restaurants. It was anchored by a Macy's and a Nordstrom and a Ritz-Carlton. It really took advantage of being far closer to central Washington, D.C. than Tyson's Corner. This was right across the 14th Street Bridge from downtown D.C. And so it was much easier for people. It was also metro accessible, so it was much easier for people to get here. And so that's why you see again a Macy's, a Nordstrom, and a Ritz-Carlton anchoring this shopping center. This would help spur additional mixed-use development in the neighborhood. You have the discount-oriented Pentagon Center across Hayes Street from this. You get the much more upscale Pentagon Row shown in the bottom right-hand corner. It's a retail and residential complex adjacent to the mall as well. But a lot of stuff has obviously occurred in the last 30 years thanks to Fashion Center of Pentagon City. And now, of course, you have the coming of Amazon as well. Metrorail. We talked about Metrorail coming initially to Arlington and Alexandria in the 1970s. By 1983, it had gone to Huntington along the Yellow Line, and the Orange Rail provided rail service to West Falls Church, Dunloring, and Vienna by 1986. And here is the Vienna Metro Station in 1986. It's pretty, kind of looks somewhat desolate compared to what has since developed around it. Some jurisdictions embraced Metrorail, such as Arlington. We talked about the bullseye concept. Fairfax County, just where we were in its planning mindset, Metrorail was really seen as just being a commuter hub, or a method to, a vehicle to get commuters downtown, a vessel, if you will. That's the right word I'm looking for. And so Fairfax County didn't really embrace high-density development around its Metrorail stations. If you look at Huntington, if you look at Dunloring, you look at Vienna, Fairfax really took the approach that, parking was really what was needed. Fairfax really just made it for commuters. There was a massive development that Hazel Peterson wanted to have constructed on the north side of I-66, shown just near that parking garage area called Virginia Center. It was ultimately denied in a highly controversial rezoning in the 1980s. I think Milt Peterson has lamented, and I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I've read that he's lamented that decision was one of the ones that he had the biggest regrets about, as far as just being a very short-sighted decision for not approving Virginia Center. I-66 inside the Beltway. Construction of I-66 inside the Beltway was completed in 1982 following a lengthy controversy and litigation over its potential socioeconomic and environmental impacts. I-66 today also provides space right in the middle of it for Metrorail, right in the middle of the strip. But it was highly controversial before it was completed in 1982. VDOT had purchased all the right-of-way to get it through. There was the 1978 Coleman decision, which came after a lot of battles. This was not just related to I-66. They wanted to route it all the way through downtown, through Georgetown, with a series of underground tunnels, and have a brand new bridge, which was known as the Three Sisters Bridge. But nothing galvanized this region in terms of opposition, in terms of Marylanders, DC residents, and Virginians in opposition to I-66, the way that I-66 was. So it's pretty remarkable. Due to the Coleman decision in 1978, there was a sort of a détente and an agreement reached that there would be no widening of this road. It would be 2 lanes inside the Beltway in each direction, and then you would be preserving the median for Metrorail. Some of the concessions that Arlington County also got out of the deal in exchange for, relenting a little bit. If you got to have the highway, this is what we want to see. They have a trail, which is shown here. You can sort of see it on the left-hand side of the interstate, called the Martha Custis Trail, which connects the W&OD Trail, developed by the Northern Virginia Regional Park Authority, all the way into Georgetown. It's a phenomenal biking route, heavily used by commuters. At Roslyn, to enter Virginia, they agreed to a 2-block urban deck with a park above it, and that park has ebbed and flowed over time. Arlington County now has plans to redevelop that into what's called their Gateway Park, really have a nice entry into Roslyn. There was to be heavy landscaping, and up until about 7 years ago or so, you could drive down I-66 and you would see the daffodils, you would see the Leland cypresses, you would see well-maintained landscaping. And at the time that this opened, the VDOT project manager said that this was going to be a road that would rival, if you can believe this, that would rival the George Washington Memorial Parkway. I don't think it did that, but compared to other interstate highways, it was a pretty darn beautiful highway for an interstate for what it was. You also have rusticated street signs and reduced signage. If you drive this stretch, there's not nearly the number of green signs that you see. You have rusticated lights, and if you drive over the little bridges, you can see the wooden beams over the Jersey barriers. So a lot of design elements were extracted from VDOT in exchange for allowing them to build this connection. And they are minor, but they did add up a little bit. One of the interesting things was, and some of you all may know this, but the Pope Leahy House, which was shown here, it's today housed at Woodlawn Plantation, which is owned by the National Trust for Historic Preservation. This building sat right smack dab on 2.5 acres in the middle of the right-of-way for this road. VDOT offered for this Frank Lloyd Wright designed house and the 2.5 acres in Arlington County near Falls Church offered $25,000 for this house. Eventually, the National Trust purchased the house. They found land that they owned at Woodlawn Plantation. They graded out the site, and they took down and with chalk numbers beam by beam and reconstructed this at Woodlawn Plantation. So if you get a chance to go down there near Mount Vernon, check it out. It's a neat project or neat house. Other connections occur in the 1980s as well, including the 35-mile planned outer circumferential expressway between Route 7 to the north and I-95, known as the Fairfax County Parkway. This road was highly controversial as well, but I think everyone kind of recognized the need to connect residential and employment areas in Reston and Herndon and Fair Lakes and Springfield. The first leg of this project started in 1985, and the final segment was completed in 2001. The Dulles Toll Road. If you all remember, the Dulles Access Road was built from the Beltway as part of the construction of Dulles Airport and took you all the way up to the airport, and it opened with Dulles Airport in 1962. In response to the amount of development along this Dulles Access Road and the number of motorists who illegally backtracked to the airport, made a loop, and then came in so as to avoid, Route 7 and other types of congested roads, VDOT proposed a toll road on the outskirts of the Dulles Access Road. It was built in 1984 by VDOT as a toll highway because conventional funding was not available. And until 2006, this toll road was operated by VDOT when it was turned over to MWA that year, I think for a price tag of about $1 billion, which under the Kane administration, which they then recycled into other transportation projects. And so this, of course, is kind of what the toll road looked like when it was built in the early 1980s. Pretty neat image, kind of rural in a way, I guess, but remarkable to see what has since happened. And what you're looking at here is where the Wheelie Avenue station is, looking west towards the Reston International Center. So there is a Metro Rail station where those Leland cypresses are in the median right now. There's all sorts of bus lanes and pedestrian overpasses and that sort of thing. So a lot has changed since this road originally went in. Further out on Route 7, west of Leesburg, there were a series of interchanges that were built around the Loudoun Towns and the Route 28 interchange. You had business Route 7 going through the heart of Leesburg, going through the heart of Hamilton, Purcellville, and Round Hill. And VDOT decided to build limited access bypasses around each of them, and then also do a new interchange at Route 28 and Route 7. We're going to see a little bit later on that this same approach of bypasses was not used in the Middleburg area to the south, where they chose to use other traffic calming measures, including roundabouts. But this definitely connected the Winchester area to Northern Virginia without having to go through these three smaller towns. You also have something that's often overlooked, and it's hard to imagine when we're stuck in traffic coming home or using I-95, frankly, any time of the day, that up until 1980, Route 95, I-95 was really just two lanes in each direction. And in 1980, the third lane was added between Woodbridge, where Shirley Highway ended, all the way down to Richmond. There are other things that occur too, other amenities. Thomas Jefferson High School for Science and Technology, or TJ as it's known, opens up in 1985. It is a state-chartered magnet school that's operated by Fairfax County Public Schools. Multiple jurisdictions from Loudoun and Prince William, Falls Church, Arlington, they send their best and brightest to this school. And it's consistently ranked as one of the top high schools in the country. And that just, again, shows how we are maturing as a region that we're able to offer that level of education. You also have the Center for Innovative Technology shown on the bottom, which opens up in 1988 on 26 acres. It's 150,000 square feet of state-supported nonprofit corporation space that invests in new technology companies. So a lot of stuff happens. So when we look through sort of the population growth up through the 1980s and such, you start seeing how Fairfax County really takes off in accommodating a lot of this growth. You get some upticks with Prince William and some with Loudoun, but they just can't match the population growth of Fairfax County. And so when we talk about the sort of 8-ton gorilla of Northern Virginia, or Virginia generally, you get over 1 million residents living in a single jurisdiction. That's a lot of Virginians that need representation. And you can sort of see the story of how that all occurred. In 1990, as we enter the 1990s, regional growth continues. Unfortunately, the go-go 80s became the slow growth, slow go of the 1990s as we have a slump in office construction resulting from overbuilding during the 1980s. But Northern Virginia during this time really does continue development of a fairly unique economy relying on federal government spending and the high-tech sector as well. And all of this, of course, meant continuing economic and demographic growth for the region as well. You have the region coming home to hundreds of trade associations and foreign-owned companies, corporate and regional headquarters. You have companies that make the annual list of the largest or fastest growing companies, or small companies, or African American, or Asian American, or Hispanic owned, or woman owned, or veteran owned companies, all locating here in Northern Virginia. Once Fairfax was built out, by and large, growth spread like wildfire across Loudoun and Prince William. Each jurisdiction, and I think it's very important to note, sought to avoid becoming a bedroom community of Fairfax in Arlington and DC. That would carry the burden of providing education and other services to residents without the commercial tax base to finance those services. So for those outer jurisdictions, attracting new jobs really became a matter of balancing the books for each local government. In Alexandria, you get Cameron Station, which opens in 1999 following the first round of BRAC closures in the 1980s. The Cameron Station Army Base closes, and you get 101 acres that's transferred to a developer to construct 1,800 homes, largely in a neo-traditional, new urbanist type design. You get 65 acres of that also being transferred to the city of Alexandria for parks. And those jobs end up moving to Fort Belvoir, particularly the Defense and Logistics Agency. At the end, or the western edge of Old Town Alexandria, you get Carlisle, which is shown in the bottom right-hand corner. This is a 76-acre mixed-use project. It's been known as, or seen as, the crown jewel of Western Alexandria. About 5.5 million square feet of office space. You get a federal courthouse. You also get the Patent and Trademark Office moving there as well. Along the waterfront, you see Ford's Landing, kind of the last vestige of undeveloped land at the southern edge of Old Town, which developed in the early 1990s. In Prince William County, there's a lot of growth that occurs, and western Prince William is really aided by the widening of I-66 and I-95. The county waited for years. A lot of the growth occurred over in the Manassas area, which is, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but the Manassas area, the western edge, and then the eastern edge where Woodbridge was. And the county waited for years for VDOT to provide transportation links for a cross-county road to link the populous east side with the rural western side around Manassas. The county's traditional route for crossing the county, be it Route 234 and Davis Ford Road, were totally inefficient. These are two-lane roads that were the scene of several fatal accidents and slowed in times of bad weather or even school bus drop-offs or pickups. And so what ended up happening were a series of cross-county links that were built. The first one is the Prince William Parkway, which is built by the Prince William County Board of County Supervisors in the 1990s. This is a road built by the county. They did not want to wait for VDOT. They floated a bond. It was a $51 million bond for the Parkway in 1988 and a special tax on Potomac Mills Mall. And the county was able to acquire the right-of-way and construct this in 3 years. Pretty remarkable. And then the other one was Route 234, and this has two elements. First was a bypass around Manassas, which is shown here, the Manassas bypass, which links, opens up in the late 1990s and connects to I-66. And the second part is linking up with a widened Route 234 all the way down to Dumfries and Independent Hill in Canova, which was completed in 2005. This is an image of what the Kathleen K. Seafelt, who was a former chairman of the board, they named it in her honor, but this is kind of what the Prince William Parkway looks like and a lot of the land that you go through between Manassas and Woodbridge. And then, of course, the Manassas bypass, the Route 234 bypass. And if any of you guys have seen the Morgan Freeman and Robert Duvall movie Deep Impact, where asteroids destroy the Earth, right before this stretch of road opened up, Hollywood came to Northern Virginia, and they used the stretch of roadway to have everybody running and screaming from the wall of water that was there to consume us all. But anyway, that is that's your Hollywood moment there. In Gainesville, in Western Prince William, for a long time, the Manassas battlefield served as a way to stem the tide of growth in Western Prince William. But you start seeing several different industrial parks forming in about 7,000 acres of land, be it the Laurel Park Industrial Complex or Wellingford or Virginia Gateway. And shown here is Virginia Gateway, the Promenade Retail Center at Virginia Gateway. You get Nissan Pavilion at Stone Ridge, which is now known as Jiffy Lube Live, opening up in 1995. And, you know, it has a massive outdoor amphitheater, and it's where a lot of us, because we try to get there in traffic, we became first introduced to names like Wellington Road and Balls Ford Road in Bristow, Virginia. A lot of us had never heard of these places and couldn't put it on a map, even if we had heard of it. One of the biggest controversies that occurs in Western Prince William in 1994 was when the Walt Disney Company bought or optioned for purchase 2,000 acres of land outside of Haymarket for a proposed Disney's America theme park. And much like the Williams Center Mall controversy, there was massive local resistance that led to, led the resort to be ended as a viable idea. Most of the land that was slated for the proposed park has instead been used to build tens of thousands of new single-family homes in the Dominion Valley, Heritage Hunt, and Piedmont communities here. But you know, there were massive protests on the downtown, on the mall in Washington D.C. This is what some imagery of what Disney's America would have looked like. I was a kid in elementary school, and I remember being excited about it. The point that the oppositionist folks, those in opposition to this said was, you're creating a fictionalized version of history in what's known as the cradle of democracy, where there actually is history in hollowed ground. And so ultimately, Disney went away. Loudoun County also continues to grow in the 1990s. You get, just like the Prince William Parkway connecting western and eastern Prince William, you get the Dulles Greenway opening up in 1995. This was the first private toll road to be built in Virginia in over 130 years. It travels 14 miles from Dulles Airport to Leesburg. It's headed by this woman shown in the upper left-hand corner, Maggie Bryant, and her family. And it's currently owned by a group called Trip 2, but the highway today remains saddled in debt, although it is heavily used as well. Industrial growth along Route 28 continues, this time pushing into Loudoun County, where there are today just dozens and dozens of flex industrial office buildings. Elsewhere in Loudoun County, you get much larger plan unit development communities that are much larger than anything that had preceded them. And these include parks, tree conservation areas, trails, wetlands, open spaces. Here's South Riding, sort of looking west, which opens in 1995. It's 2,000 acres. It's heralded, it heralded major growth along the Route 50 corridor west of 28, where there really was absolutely nothing there before. Broadlands opens up in 1995, 1,500 acres and 3,800 homes. Cascades opens up in 1990, 6,500 homes. Lansdowne on the Potomac that we talked about with Xerox and the golf course, and Leisure World, which is a massive retirement community that's built there as well. You get Dulles Town Center. Finally, with the rooftops come the retail and the quality restaurants and retail that you expect with those. Dulles Town Center opens up in 1999, 1.4 million square feet. You also get University Center when GW, George Washington University, locates offices out here in Loudoun County in the upper left-hand corner. You get Loudoun then starting to be seen as sort of a great location for corporate locations. AOL opens up in 1996, shown in the bottom left-hand corner. WorldCom MCI in the upper right-hand corner opens up in 1999, and Dulles Tech Center in the bottom right-hand corner opening up in the late 1990s, early 2000s. In Fairfax County, Lorton Prison closes right around the turn of the century. This had been the D.C. reformatory where all of D.C.'s prisoners were sent. By the late 1960s, it was a very bad situation, and people had been clamoring for it to be closed. And as soon as it was closed, in 2001, you start seeing development occurring in that corridor from Cross Point to Barrington to South Run and Lorton Station, almost happening all overnight in and around the former prison area. And here's Lorton Station as well, kind of a little mini town center. Other transportation connections, the Springfield-Franconia Parkway opens up in 1996. You get the Virginia Railway Express that starts express service to DC in 1992. And Metro Rail comes to Springfield in 1997 at the Franconia Springfield Station, which really serves as a massive hub for rail transit, bus transit, and for automobiles. You get the extension. A lot of us remember living through the extension of the HOV lane south from Backlick Road in Springfield all the way down to Route 234. My wife is from South Carolina, and she remembers driving up here after college to move up here with her father. And they arrived just as the lights were turning on in the medians of I-95. And she came from a smaller town in South Carolina, and she said, you know, this is really a big city. This is a major area. And, you know, these lights, as we drive through them all over, these lights do mean a lot. They're pretty remarkable when you enter our region. You're entering a pretty major area. And of course, you get the widening of I-56 also out to the new 234 bypass interchange. It widens all throughout the 1990s. It's a major 18-mile widening from Centerville all the way out. National Airport, we have air transportation as well, has a new terminal, which opens up in 1997 with large works of art and 54 Jeffersonian columns. It's a great little place. There's also a major debate about an outer bypass into Maryland, what's known as the Western Transportation Corridor. It gets battled back and forth between 1966 and 2001, when it's kind of killed by the General Assembly. But it is added back as sort of a north-south corridor of statewide significance back in 2011. Here are the comprehensive plans for a couple of jurisdictions. Here's Fairfax County in sort of the lighter green. You can see the downzoned area. Here's Prince William County, which, by the 1990s was also looking to stop or slow a lot of growth. So they create what's known as the Rural Crescent, and they downzone a lot of the western areas of the county to 10-acre lots, which is shown in sort of the lighter Manila areas. And of course, Loudoun County, perhaps most famous for implementing smart growth techniques in the 2000s, downzones the western two-thirds of the county and comprehensively plans for those downzonings in 2003, and then again in 2000, following a Virginia Supreme Court decision. When you add up, I think what's important to note, even though smart growth may no longer be, the term of art that we use, but when you add up the different corridors of growth between all the jurisdictions, between Northern Virginia down to Richmond and then over to Orange County near Charlottesville, the areas in red here are kind of the areas that each of these jurisdictions have cordoned off for growth. And the areas that are outside of that are not shown in red are areas that are on, say, 2.5 to 3 acres plus of lower development potential. So a lot of, the ghost of smart growth will be with us for a long time. And it's important to note when we think about transportation infrastructure and the cost of housing, how restrictive sort of our growth really has been. A poster child of this is shown here. You can sort of see the difference between Loudoun County and Sterling and the Great Falls area. Sort of the difference right across the street. You've got cul-de-sacs versus little farmettes on the Fairfax side. And this is what it looks like from a street map perspective. And then, of course, you can sort of see here again, Loudoun County, this is the bottom of South Riding. And you can see Fairfax County sort of downzoned, Aqua downzoning area versus where Loudoun's growth area is on its eastern border. So it's pretty remarkable. Sort of wrapping up here as we come into the 2000s, I'm going to sort of breeze through a lot of this. You have the BRAC closures that end up relocating a lot of stuff or a lot of development all across Northern Virginia. You have major growth at Fort Belvoir and the former engineering proving grounds. All these sort of developments and growth emanating out from DC. You get the Woodrow Wilson Bridge, which is recreated in 2006. That replaces the original 1961 span. There it is shown here with Alexandria on the left and Maryland on the right. Alongside with that is a new interchange for Route 1, sort of a major restacking, huge complex. A lot of us also remember from the 1980s and 1990s that every single traffic update on the radio would start with congestion at the Springfield interchange, which is shown here. It's very easy to forget how bad traffic was, but over an 8-year, 7-phase reconstruction, there were 50 new ramps, 20 new lanes, and the merging of 3 major interstates, which finally is completed in 2007. And it is definitely a machine where 430,000 vehicles come together and get sorted out. You get the phase one of the Silver Line that goes out to Reston, through Tysons and Reston and Loudoun. What's different about the phase one Silver Line this time around is that in Tysons Corner, at least, Fairfax County has sort of evolved, and they did not program in any parking around its 4 metro stations through Tysons. Much like Arlington 30 years ago, 40 years ago, wanting to use Metro Rail as a way to drive the urbanization and filling in the missing pieces of development. And here it is shown in Tysons here. Again, Metro Rail stations, no parking. So Fairfax's thoughts on Metro Rail has evolved. And when you drive in on 495 into Northern Virginia, Tysons Corner sort of, now stands out like you're driving into Atlanta. It's a massive, huge agglomeration of buildings. And in 2011, finally got its own address. It was either McLean or Vienna before. Now it's its own postal code, thanks to the federal government. And just a lot of new growth has occurred around Tysons Corner. And you can see the award-winning plans that Fairfax County has had about putting in a new system of, sort of a street grid and connecting all the different quadrants of Tysons Corner and transforming it from the classic quintessential edge city into something far more. And this is kind of what Tysons Corner looks like today as well. I-66 was widened out all the way to Haymarket. There's a new reverse diamond interchange at Haymarket, which is kind of cool to drive through. But the Gainesville interchange no longer has an at-grade crossing of a rail line. We all lived through up here in Northern Virginia the I-495 hot lanes. Those came in as well. And then they were eventually extended in the HOV lanes all the way down to Aqua, and now it's going even further down to Fredericksburg as far as the hot lanes go. The completion of the Fairfax County Parkway occurs in 2011. In Route 7 in Loudoun County, a lot of new interchanges open up, and traffic, like Route 28, really does flow very nicely through there, again, relative to what it used to be. Loudoun County attracts Howard Hughes Medical Institute to open up its Genelia Farm Research Campus. So again, a lot of high density or highly educated type things that are going on there. Loudoun County also becomes a data center, a magnet for data centers. Of the top 10 tax producing revenue generating property owners in the county, I think 6 of them are data center operators. Again, some of the new growth, and I'm just going to whisk through these because I know Sarah's going to eventually need to cut me off, but massive new communities such as Willisford on about 4,000 acres, which has as its main amenity a CSA agricultural farm. Stone Ridge, One Loudoun, again, this is sort of now evolving to the downtown of eastern Loudoun County as One Loudoun. You get the rooftops there, then you get the retail and the office uses and stuff. In western Prince William, a lot of new growth as well along Linton Hall Road and Bent Hill Road. You can sort of see the difference between, say, the 1980s, early 1980s, and about 2011. A lot of new growth around Bristow. And here's that area where Disney wanted to build its theme park. You can sort of see it in about 2001. Then you can see it in 2005. So just overnight growth in the Haymarket area with Dominion Valley, Heritage Hunt, and Piedmont. And additional growth with Wegmans. Everyone loves Wegmans. Down along I-95, you get the Potomac Town Center that's developing in Potomac Shores, which is probably the last major development along one of the peninsulas in Prince William County, which is currently under construction. Fort Belvoir behind the gates, all you need is your ID. You can go there and see how they've embraced neo-traditional development and new urbanism. They have a little town center, and a lot of their new development from the Department of Defense is using new urbanism for their housing on post. This is a redevelopment of an area in eastern Loudoun County known as Cascades Marketplace. Here is Tysons Town Center. Finally, the build out of the Tycon Tower occurs in about 2014 or so. And then Fairfax County, this is the Vienna Metro Station, created Fairleigh Metro West, where they were putting in a lot of high density development around the Vienna Metro Station. So I consider a lot of what we're developing now in Northern Virginia to be sort of filling in the pieces because, again, smart growth has sort of cordoned off the areas, for better or for worse, has cordoned off the areas that growth can occur. So we now have to look inwards, which is not, from my perspective, and I'm editorializing, a bad thing at all. Mosaic District, an area that used to be home to just a place where you would go to a multiplex cinema or get your car windshield replaced before they came to you. You would go to the area that's now known as the Mosaic District in the Greater Falls Church Merrifield area, Fairfax County. The older commercial areas, Delray, Manassas, they've all seen new leases on life. Potomac Yard, shown here, is being redeveloped as well. Loudoun County has adopted its Silver Line Comprehensive Plan Amendment, or proposed it. It's now defunct, but a lot of this is now incorporated into the new draft plan, the new draft comprehensive plan that Loudoun County adopted just last week. And you can sort of see the development that Loudoun is anticipating around Loudoun Station and Moorfield Station. Columbia Pike is developed as well. Again, we're filling in the pieces here in Arlington County. And then downtown Fairfax and downtown Manassas have seen new leases on life as well. They're looking better than ever. They really are. Downtown Falls Church is seeing a lot of growth too. Redevelopment of suburban shopping centers such as Tyson's Corner, and shown here is the redevelopment of Springfield Mall, eventually when it fully builds out. So we're taking these asphalt parking lots and going vertical. Westfield's hired ULI to come in and do a technical assistance program, and they recommended additional retail and residential development in Westfields, which had hence heretofore just been single occupancy or single use for flex industrial. Fairfax County also last year adopted the Embark Richmond Highway program, which seeks to have bus rapid transit and eventually Metro Rail down this older commercial corridor of Route 1, Richmond Highway. And then one of the final things I'll say is that, with a lot of the growth emanating westward, there were population declines or steadying of population and growth of school kids in older areas of Arlington and Fairfax County. Fairfax County turned a lot of their old schools that reached the end of a useful life and just didn't have the population to support it into administrative buildings. And a lot of them are now being repurposed as there's been revitalization inside the Beltway, and you're starting to see the school children population increase. So a lot of these community buildings, I imagine over time, will be repurposed for schools as well. Then we've also, again, sort of talked about the development of a outer bridge crossing. And then this is the Route 50 looking westward. And you can sort of see, instead of bypasses, VDOT, after a lot of local pressure, decided to build a series of roundabouts to calm traffic and get traffic moving. And those roundabouts, it's the most extensive use of them in Virginia, and it's pretty remarkable. It works very, very well. And last but not least, Amazon is coming to Northern Virginia. Again, highlights the prowess of this region. And my last slide is this one, which when you're driving in from suburban Maryland on the Beltway into Northern Virginia, the control city, which are the cities that you list like Washington, Richmond, Virginia Beach, the control city is not Richmond. It is Northern Virginia. And so that just shows how, as a region, we've grown. And so with that, I guess I will conclude my remarks. I appreciate everyone's indulgence and letting me go a little bit over.
Thanks, Andrew.
Sarah?
Yes, thank you. And if you have any questions, now is time to send them in. Thank you for those of you who stuck with us. It looks like mostly everyone stayed past one, so that is awesome. While I'm giving everyone a chance to give any questions that you have, just a reminder that our annual conference early bird rates in June 30th at the end of this week. So Monday they'll go up. If you are interested in attending our conference and want more information, you can find it all at apavirginia.com. I will send a follow-up email to all attendees about this webinar with information on how to track your CM credit and how to follow up with Andrew if you have specific questions for him, with info about next month's webinar, which is with the City of Richmond planning staff. They'll be talking about Richmond 300, the master plan. If you're interested in presenting a webinar, I have a lot of availability at the end of the summer and the rest of the year, and you can contact me at sarah@apavirginia.com. That's Sarah with an H. And I do not believe we're going to have any questions this time, which is funny because last time there were a bunch. So, Andrew, is there anything you want to add before we get off here?
Nope, I think I'm good.
Okay. Oh, well,
I'm good. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, I got a comment. Thank you for an excellent overview. Comment from Patricia. Alrighty. Well, like I said, we will have this recording up on our YouTube channel with CM credit availability retroactively if you didn't catch the whole thing, or if you're listening in a future recording, you can earn CM credit by watching this webinar. Thank you for spending your lunch hour with APA Virginia, and to our sponsors over at the Berkeley Group. And Andrew, thank you for giving us your time this afternoon. I hope everyone has a great rest of their day.